Oh, we were Swiss reformed.
And did he make you attend church regularly?
Oh, well, that was quite natural. Yes. Everybody went to church on Sunday.
And did you believe in God?
Oh, yes.
Do you now believe in God?
Now? Difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know.
Preach it, Carl. Yes, give us more. It's all about the knowledge. It's all about the direct experience with the divine. We'll get more. We'll circle back with Jung. We'll get more into the knowledge of other worlds. But first, please allow me to allow you to listen to the introduction. Happy heresies, and welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, broadcast at the virtual Alexandria through the God above God that can. We don't take prisoners but liberate them. We are not for a better world, but helping you build better inner worlds. We're not for or against any cause except causing an inner alchemical transformation that will help you reach the potential you've been searching for throughout many reincarnations and many holographic realities. We certainly don't make excuses about our stance against this prison planet and the deficient constructs of mad angels and their earthly plutocracies and technocracies. As the old saying goes, a pessimist is a man who looks at the world with one eye closed, and an optimist is a man who looks at the world with both eyes closed.
In other words, we're talking about an underground, which did exist in a different way during the Dark Ages among the mystical orders of the Church. And the purpose of this underground is to find out how to preserve the light, life, the culture, how to keep things living.
Welcome, you jaded mandarins and veterans of 1,000 psychic wars. Welcome to the beginning of the end of the reign of Jehovah and his angelic mafia. At least in your existence. At least in the latest roll of your 20-sided karmic die. The Sufi poet Rabia encapsulated our sacred and profane quest when she wrote, I carry a torch in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. With these things I am going to set fire to heaven and put out the flames of hell, so the voyagers to God can rip the veils and see the real gold.
If you could be either God's worst enemy or nothing, which would you choose? We're the middle children of history. We have no special purpose or place, and unless we get God's attention, we have no hope of damnation or redemption. Which is worse, hell or nothing?
I am Abraxas in his meat muppet incarnation of Miguel Connor, broadcasting in the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago. I hope you understand that I bring you ancient but perennial liberating heresy, those contraband truths of the Gnostics, through a literary lens. Our war is not a spiritual war, an ideas war, or a political war. Our war is an artistic one, and that's where our ultimate liberation lies, Articum Olam. The meaning of life is to give meaning to a mechanistic cold universe, and we do this through our imagination, our invention, and our myth-making. We will be victorious even as the hordes of hell and marketing gurus and social media sirens bear down upon us in the battlefields of the true seeker warrior. As Hermes in the Corpus Hermeticum says, make yourself grow to a greatness beyond measure, free yourself from the body, raise yourself above all time, become eternity. Then you will understand God.
I'm sorry? What was that again?
I'm a god.
You're God.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I don't think.
Again, I'm no savior, but together we blaze the universe alive by being cosmically entertaining and that brings out all of our inner saviors. And everything I've just said and quoted truly can be summarized in one sentence. Write your own gospel and live your own myth.
It's been a brilliant journey of self-awakening. Now you've simply got to ask yourself this. What is happiness to you?
On this June, the year of our demiurge 2017, get ready for a magic carpet ride. You might say our astral guest, as a senior, is finally leaving the occult closet into the public rooms. And what a journey he's had, from meeting Krishnamurti, Timothy Leary, and other esoteric exemplars, to visions and their interpretations that are on par with Carl Jung. And in fact, we'll be discussing a lot of Jung, as mentioned in the beginning, including his views on UFOs, the unconscious, the afterlife, and so much more.
There are far worse things awaiting man than death.
And our guest is David Curtis, author of several books he just decided to publish that include Abraxas, Dictionary of Symbols, and The Luminary is Coming. And yes, we'll also deal with Abraxas and so many other arcane topics from a very unique and spirit-provoking perspective. You'll get the full dope of David's interview in our bonus section, where I think even his ideas on death and the afterlife are memorable and immersive.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
Recently I was on both the Higher Side Chats and the World Beyond Radio. The topic of how the Gnostics felt about death came up. I gave the different answers from different sects. But between us, here is their dope, and David Curtis echoes this in our interview. That is, if what we are mostly is false, a construct of mad gods and the pressure cooking of this West world, then how do we know that which dies is even our real selves? Which part of us is destined for immortality or the next journey into the heavenly spheres? That's why the Gnostics contended we must become living Christ while still in the flesh, because then we'll know about death as well as so many other secrets. And our simian brains won't care about it.
First, you have to give up. First, you have to know, not fear, know that someday you're gonna die.
Trust me, in my moments of marifa, as the Sufis call gnosis, death is no longer an issue because part of me is already beyond life and death, beyond this cosmos and its programming that makes me believe that temporal has any importance. Both the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of the Egyptians claim that in Gnosis one will no longer taste death. And the Gospel of Philip says death came into the world when Adam was separated from Eve, an avatar of Sophia or higher wisdom.
She tore a hole in our universe, a gateway to another dimension.
As for Jung and UFOs, it seems he thought of them as more than a modern myth, since recent publications reveal he was asking the USA government about their data on extraterrestrials. Jung also did write once that, quote, "We always think that UFOs are projections of ours. Now it turns out that we are their projections. I am projected by the magic lantern of Carl Jung, but who manipulates the apparatus?" Or as Whitley Strieber said in his latest book, Supernatural, they're not embedded with us, we're embedded with them. This all goes back to who we are and what part of us will even see the afterlife. That one in control of the projection. Perhaps our daemon, if we take from Anthony Peake and his work. Let's find out, and let's find out with David Curtis and other psychonauts that come to the virtual Alexandria each week.
Do not try and bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth.
What truth?
There is no spoon.
There is no spoon?
Then you'll see that it is not the spoon that bends, it is only yourself.
Again, you'll get the second part of David's interview in our members area for a paltry $5.99 a month, the price of a Klingon massage. As a member, you gain access to more than 350 episodes with the best and brightest in Gnosticism, Western esoterica, and free thought, as well as being able to join our Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group, where David will be there to answer your questions on this interview. And many other past guests, from Robert Price to Tim Freak, hang out there for the latest in modern Gnosticism. You can also get this content by becoming a patron at Patreon. If all of this is not your cup of tea with a UFO saucer, please support this Red Pill Cafeteria via PayPal or buying any books from the site, as I get a kickback from Amazon.com. I can't do it without you. Speaking of sites, check out our new look at thegodabovegod.com. I think you'll like it, and please give me your feedback by going on the contact form in the menu section. In fact, if you've got holes in your pocket due to the soul raping of archons, let me know and I'll give you any show you want. We're doing so many wonders together here at Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, building vast futures of light and a community of mystics, madmen, and sages. Those of you who support every week are truly appreciated, and I can't thank you enough. But enough of my drivel. Let us do the interview with David Curtis and continue to understand why there is probably no death once we have higher wisdom, and you find out you are just the projection of an alien god.
Why are you doing this? You did this to yourself. And admitting that is the first step. You're a crackhead. Thing is, this planet and these people, they're your drug of choice. It wasn't that hard to make a universe. At first you just checked in every once in a while. See how the Neanderthals were doing. Move a couple of continents around. But then you got more into it. You started playing a couple of characters of your own. Slaves, kings, messiahs. Pretty soon, you were playing 24/7.
How long have I been?
You've been gone for 4,000 years. Not that time means the same for us.
You came looking for me.
That's what a girl does.
Why now?
Because you forgot who you were.
I forgot this wasn't real.
We couldn't just storm in on a fiery chariot. It was your universe. We had to play by your rules. We had to show you how limited and corrupt your little world was. Don't get me wrong, it's a nice place. It's cozy. But do you remember where you came from?
It was warm and white. You can't describe it with human words.
You can't think it with human thoughts. We need you to come back. With us. Come back with me.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by David Curtis. How are you doing today, David?
Yeah, I'm fine today, thank you.
And we are again joined by the Moondog Vance. And how are you doing today there, Vance?
Oh, pretty good for middle of the morning.
Yes. The Vance is in the West Coast. I'm at 6 in the morning here in Chicago, so it's very early there. I think David has the advantage. It's around lunchtime. So,
That's
but
right.
I think we'll do fine. So tell us, David, tell us a little bit about yourself, specifically. When did you have an experience, or when did you realize that the world and the universe was a lot busier than it might have been before? When did you have your moments of awakening?
Right. Well, I can give a brief background quite quickly. I was born in Greater Manchester up in the northwest in Salford. I came to Oxford at 2, so that's 47. At 15, my sister married an American, and I joined them in New England, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I stayed there for about a year. Then I went to live with a family in New York, Poughkeepsie. And this was on the Hudson, about 50 miles north of New York City. And it was probably when I was 19, 20, I went to the State University of New York at Stony Brook, Long Island. And in my third year of comparative religion and philosophy, I decided to abandon my studies. I was not aware of the counterculture, so it's a purely individual thing. And later I found out that Stony Brook was actually the Berkeley of the East. And it was quite a revolutionary campus. I had no awareness. I was very straight, so I was quite naive. But one day I saw people painting their faces and they were going to this concert. And I was into classical, so it was quite new for me. So I went along, and as I walked into the auditorium, this group was playing a kind of a jazz like on and on for about an hour. And then the Jimi Hendrix Experience came on stage. So that was quite a shock. And then I found out later that that was the soft machine, which I've been told comes from William Burroughs. And so anyway, I go from Stony Brook back to Poughkeepsie, and that's when the first change came. So it's kind of coincident with the counterculture, which I didn't know about, the dropping out. And I describe it as a kind of Gothic hinterland, one might say. So it wasn't an event like an experience, suddenly a shock, an experience, but it actually was a total takeover. So that in a sense, more or less one day, I was straight, so to speak, and seeing the consensus reality in the world around me in a kind of normal fashion. And then suddenly I was in this liminal state. And I began to make decisions and to meet people and go places that I would never have gone before. And during that time, the son of the family I lived with in high school, he came back from Vietnam. And he said, well, let's go out and see Leary. And I didn't know who Leary was. So I'm in this state anyway. But so we drive from Poughkeepsie about probably 20 miles to Millbrook. And we go into this large estate, and we drive through this large estate and come to this huge house. And on the house is painted faces and psychedelics. And people are lounging around in a kind of trance-like state. And I suppose my friend said, where's Leary? And he was in this field with this kind of motor rotor or something digging up the soil. Anyway, he comes over, and I guess there was a conversation. And in the local paper, in the Poughkeepsie paper, it showed Leary throwing flowers at the police that came out there quite regularly to raid them,
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And this was in the late 60s, right, David?
Yeah, this would be about 67, 68. And as I say, it didn't have any effect on me going to see Leary. And when I studied comparative religion, there was no such thing as personal experience. It was just, institutionalized dogma. So anyway, I'm starting to meet very unusual people. People had what they call a head shop. I think probably it was the influence of Haight-Ashbury in California and the kind of Ken Kesey, and they drifted over to the east. And what happened was I met these people, and eventually I crossed the Hudson, went inland about, say, 20 miles to a place called New Paltz. And I decided to do art in New Paltz State. Got bored after a few weeks. And I suppose the kind of thing, if you ask me in this state, what did I experience? I would say, first of all, the sense of freedom. And also that with that, which was emerging a bit earlier, was a sense of creativity, doing poetry, doing art and such. And so I'm in Newport, which is not far from the Catskill Mountains, where Woodstock is. So I'm in there about 68, and on 69, I decide to leave America just on the kind of fringes of the Woodstock Festival. So I was in with all those types of people. And so, it was, Lao Tzu, it was very much the Eastern idea. And so that was my first flavor of spirituality. It was more kind of transcendental. So that's the kind of, I became the hippie, counterculture, and more or less that's been my lifestyle since then, on the fringes and so forth. So it's quite an interesting journey.
Yeah, indeed. It seems, like you said, a journey of freedom. And as you've said before and written, you actually met Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti, is it?
Very intimate with Krishnamurti, the whole inner circle. But I'm not an inner circle person. But I've had many opportunities to be in so-called inner circles. But I think, what happened was, 69, I come back to England, and my mother has a boarding house near Oxford. That's my hometown. And I decided to go to Banbury Art School. I go to Banbury Art School. I get a grant, and I think, no, it's not for me. I had about £70, and I decided to go to India. I had read a couple of books, Uspensky's In Search of the Miraculous and Lama Govinda book, Foundations of Tibetan Buddhism. And that kind of inspired me to go to India. So I end up actually going to India and living next door to Lama Govinda. Now, have you heard of someone called Evans Wentz?
No, I haven't. Have you, Vance?
No, I haven't heard yet.
Well, Leary and others go on about the Book of the Dead, the Bardo Tadal.
Right.
That.
Yes.
Well, he wrote the foreword, and I think in that book, Jung wrote the psychological commentaries on the book. Anyway, this Lama, I went to live next door to him, and Evans Wentz, who was actually a student, an American student in Jesus College, Oxford, and he lived in the house before that. And what's interesting is the Himalaya foothills, which is bordering Tibet, the actual ridge, it's like a ridge which the house was on, was known familiarly as the Cranks Ridge because of all these weird people, Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. So it was actually known as Cranks Ridge. So I attended seminar type situation at Lama Govinda's. Nothing took. It just didn't take. And so I just drifted off. I just went on my own in the mountains, in the hills, whatever. After 6 months, I came back to England, and in a short while, I entered the monastery and started to read Christian literature, the Desert Fathers and those kind of mystics and everything. I came out of there, and friends of mine who were into all of this said, well, there's this guru, although that's not the term Krishnamurti would use, but they said, oh, there's a guru, Krishnamurti. We're going down, we're camping out down there in his school, Brockwood Park, Hampshire. So I went along, and that was my first contact with Krishnamurti. And when he actually walked into the marquee, I realized for the first time that there was some other person that actually, you might say, had the same mind or the same state as I had. So that was my kind of initial contact with Krishnamurti. And from then on, quite profound things happened with him.
What kind of things happened? That's very interesting. You sound like you were kind of drifting all those years, trying to find something that resonated with you. Is that right?
Yes. I read a couple of books, Uspensky, Gurdjieff, and that, just a couple of books, few books. So I was more on the mystical side, more kind of, not introspective. I've never been what you might call an interior person, because I was brought up in a non-religious household, so that words like good and evil, hell, soul, heaven, Christ, God meant nothing, absolutely nothing to me. We were just materialists that would live and die. That was the reality I lived in. So it was never an interior. And even when I was creative, I never thought, oh, it's coming from inside. So I've never had that kind of inside type of thing. But anyway, this state I was in New Pulse, it was, you might say, a kind of shadow world. It was a liminal world. It was subconscious. And in India, it deepened into a profound sense of the void. And that was a term I picked up from Lama Govinda. And that haunted me for decades. What I couldn't understand was that, in Christian mysticism, it's called the cloud of unknowing. So you're kind of like, at a certain level of awareness, you have this new awareness, and there's this insurmountable object. There's this, you might say, phenomenon in the psyche that you don't have the skills to deal with. You don't. So I was never a person of method. So I've never meditated or practiced any method of any kind. It's like going alone. And then I met Krishnamurti and said, it's a pathless journey. There's no path, etc., etc. And that kind of was good for me because, as you say, I was drifting, searching, very alone in the Sufi sense of alone with the alone, which is Ibn Arabi's terminology. So I was kind of mystical, let's put it that way, high-minded. Yes.
In what way were you mystical? In the big M mystical, where you felt a oneness with the universe, although it seemed empty, or was it a mystical in terms of looking for strange and interesting information?
I think from the early days of having this new awareness, this openness, it became what I would call, and this is what was going on in the monastery, which was a silent order, and it was being receptive. If you want to receive a message in that subtle way, then you have to be receptive. I knew what knowledge was, university. I knew what that was. I knew what creativity was. And when I had the void experience, which was very profound, very terrible, that shook me up. And then I came out of that and I was much lighter. I was much lighter through that experience, whether it's a polarity or not. So with Krishnamurti, what happened one day was at the end of the conference, probably in the late 70s, I had my suitcase walking away, and I heard somebody say something. I kind of turned around, it was him, and I went over and stood near him. And there was definitely something going on. There was a kind of one-to-one intimacy and, almost a blending. So his voice sounded like my voice, and it was something very uncanny. So I leave him, go to catch the bus to Winchester, and then from Winchester to Oxford through the Vale of the White Horse. So I get on the coach, and we enter the valley, and this kind of miraculous state occurred. I was in the front of the coach to the left of the driver, and the whole world changed. That's all I can say. Just as that first experience of my own, the whole world changed in a more kind of shadowy sense. This changed, I would say, in a absolute enchantment. It was like, you could say paradise or enchantment. And we were in the Vale of the White Horse, which of course is very Celtic and so forth. And it was so powerful that I literally wanted to stand up and say to everybody, can you see this? Can you see this? I don't know how long it went on for, but you might say the coach, the people, me, the world around me, it's just like someone turned over a page. It, invisibly just switched. So that was and I'll go on to tell you another one which will reveal what the true nature of that is, and my critique of Krishnamurti, so I can tell you how I'm able now to critique altered states of mind.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
Okay, so I go back to Oxford. My best friend, this kind of aristocratic old man, is the kind of Steiner representative. I get right into Steiner, and then the next change, the next what I would call fundamental change, was the discovery of synchronicity, and then the discovery of that's where I've been from 1980 to 2014. I've been processing the esoteric tradition, or you might say comparative mythology, but I've been processing all of that, so to speak. So that's 1980, and these nexus of synchronicities begin, and even the word coincidence wasn't part of my vocabulary, and then certainly in Krishnamurti circles, anything to do with knowledge, culture, esotericism, anything like that was taboo. You absolutely, if you were at the conference, you could never ask questions from those points of view. So he was in total command. He just commanded everything.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a real tyrant, and I can go into the...
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I can go into the Inquisition that he put these students through. It. I mean, it was like real child abuse in that sense, really horrific.
Wow, like Torquemada of the East or something like that.
Pardon?
Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor.
Oh, right, okay.
But go ahead, tell us about this.
Yeah, so that's 1980, and I'm in the place called Pusey Street and St. John Street in the middle of Oxford. I'm within 100 yards of the Ashmolean Museum, and Elias Ashmole, who set up the first public museum in England, he was a Rosicrucian, founder of the Royal Society, became the Invisible College, and he wrote books on John Dee, the Elizabethan physician and esotericist, John Dee. So when you go, that was my favorite haunt as an 8-year-old. I would go down into the museum, and my favorite was the Egyptian room. And I didn't know then, but the main object in that Egyptian room is Akhenaten. So I never knew that, which is quite interesting. So I'm living right next to that place, and I started writing things. For example, I wrote things that came true. I wrote this play, and every single thing in that play came true. So the people, even the marriage breakdown, everything I wrote came true. So I entered these nexus of people, and in Oxford at that time, the emphasis was on magic, Crowley and magic. That was the kind, so you met people and they all knew about Crowley. They all knew about magic, and they were into all levels of magic. And I wasn't quite into that level. And, so anyway, I'm in my room one day, and I'm looking out of the window. It's a garret. It's on the roof. So it's a kind of garret room on the roof. And it's a massive window. I'm looking to the west, and there's the line of hills, because Oxford is in the Thames Valley. The Thames River is the kind of key thing that goes down to London, about 50 miles. So I'm sitting in my room and just being receptive. I don't meditate, just being receptive. And I can't, it's very difficult to say, but I knew, something in me knew there was something over the hill. Let's put it that way. For instance, if you were a bird and you knew what no human being would know, you would know that there was an earthquake, right? You'd just pick it up.
Right,
whatever the frequency is, whatever that frequency is, you would know the tsunami's coming. or the ice age is coming, whatever it is. So I knew, let's put it that way, I knew. And this phenomenon was coming over the hills. And I was kind of transfixed, wondering what this was. So my total attention was on what was coming over that hill. Now, whatever was coming over that hill was purely invisible, but I knew it was getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And I knew that if I let it come into, to me, it would just wipe me out. In other words, it would just take over. It was such a power. And I've never given in. I'm not a person that's had an out of the body. I'm not a person that cultivates altered state. So I've actually never had what you might call an interior out of the body or altered state. Although, we all have access to altered states, but that specific idea of, you find in Ramdas and people in the East of letting go of the ego, you let go of the ego. But in fact, I did let go of the ego in the Himalayas when I went into the void. So I know what it's like to have your kind of identity effaced. And in fact, I feel that my whole life I've not had what you might call a specifically dominant ego. And I don't think the ego is a reality anyway. I think it's totally a product of your thought. I think the self's a reality, but I don't think the ego is a reality. I think it's just, the identity or dominant identity, we use, if, for instance, if I'm an artist, then that would be my persona. That would be my identity. And when you're not an artist, you're just yourself. So I never had any problem with ego, like Jung had a problem with ego. So, that experience in Oxford, that power, that invisible power, I liken to what Krishnamurti calls immensity. He calls it immensity. He calls it benediction. He calls it going to the source of creation, which I frankly, I think is rubbish. But anyway, yeah, so I'm linking that, what I call altered state, however profound, it was an altered state. It was something conjured up by your thought, conjured up by your psyche. It's the matrix. It's still the matrix. And he, and I said this on another interview, he felt safe in that powerful place. And he didn't want to compromise it. He didn't want it questioned. He didn't want it contextualized. He didn't want, when the Buddhist scholar tried to contextualize it with him, he just stopped him. And so I feel that don't forget, he came out of the Theosophy Society. He was raised more or less in London by aristocrats. He had a very aristocratic lifestyle. He gives up theosophy, has a big following. He lives in all these very mansions and castles and everything. And he has this kind of wealthy elite lifestyle. And of course, it's power. However you look at it, is power. And he had an experience in his 40s. I think he was in Ohio, California, in the redwood. He was living in the forest, the redwood sequoia. And he was writing to Ledbetter, who took over with Annie Besant from Blavatsky and from Olcott.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Krishnamurti is born in 1895. So Ledbetter, he's in India and he's walking along the beach at Adyar, the theosophical headquarters, and he sees this boy. And of course, there's claims that Ledbetter was homosexual. Well, not homosexual, but anyway, molested boys.
Yes, I've heard that too.
Yeah, and they took showers together, all that kind of talk. But anyway, he saw this boy who was a Brahmin. He saw this boy as the coming Maitreya, the Bodhisattva Maitreya, which means he's going to incarnate in Krishnamurti as the embodiment of love, the principle of love. And when in California, Krishnamurti had all these visions of the Bodhisattva and all of that. So he's a visionary. He lives in his psyche. He probably lives in his inner world. He was seemed to be very vacant as a child. He didn't participate in schoolwork. So he's obviously a person, like people have, mediums are very much like that. And I think he's very into mediums. In fact, he did proclaim himself to be a healer and so forth and so on. So, that's the kind of way I see Krishnamurti, that he was attached to an altered state. He found power there. He found safety there. He was still in the elite. He was part of the Buddha, so he's in this elite company. And, let's put it this way. I feel I found him out because I shared in exactly the state he was in. And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't reveal this to anybody. And you could never do that. If you're at the, I knew the inner circle, so to speak, you would never ever say that you've experienced something like Krishnamurti. Forbidden. And of course, the Sufis, when they said they were at one not only with Muhammad, but they were at one with Allah, they were persecuted and killed, of course.
Very true, very true. Yeah. This is very interesting, David. What a journey you've taken and the places you've gone and where you are now. Keeping more in line with the show, we definitely want to hear about you finding Jung and your work on Jung, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the Red Book, which still seems to be, you might say, scientism is still clinging on to as sort of just a symbolical work, although I feel it's much more. So tell us about Jung.
Right, Jung. Well, I've written a biography of Jung, kind of a critique, that's what I like to do, a critique, Jung Avatar. And my best friend of 30 years, an Oxford graduate, is Professor Roderick Mayne. He teaches nearby at the University of Essex, and we have a 4-hour talk every couple of months. So I'm in touch with the Jungian community, but I've never been a part of the Jungian community. And he's a leading scholar in synchronicity and Jung and so forth and so on. The Jungian kind of template, you might say, the Jungian model of the psyche, I consider to be altered states. My critique of Jung, the Jung Avatar, is really a critique of his life story as recorded in Memory, Dreams, Reflections, his autobiography. So I took more or less from his childhood, his first childhood memory of a dream. In that memory, in that dream, he's in the vicinity of his vicarage, because he was raised as a Christian. His father was a vicar, as it were. So in the dream, he's in the vicinity of the vicarage, which is in the vicinity of the local castle. He enters this underworld burial chamber, and he said that he was visited, so to speak, as a child, by an alien guest. That was the term he said. And when he went through, he drew aside this green curtain, and there was a bright red carpet leading to a platform with a golden chair. And on the chair was an erect phallus, a massive fleshy phallus. And on the top of the phallus, he thought was an eye, or near thereabouts, an eye. He said it taught him the mysteries of the earth, and that was his first initiation. So although he was totally unconscious, he said for the rest of his life that at that time his intellect, he said his intellect was awakened, and that first initiation was fully conscious about 1913. So he was born in 1875, so 38, around 38. And also Crowley was born in 1975, and probably Gurdjieff as well. So it's quite an interesting time.
Wow, what a year.
So anyway, he's visited by this alien guest and initiated, and his intellect awakened. And what he says about himself as a child is that he had an experience of a kind of split consciousness. There was the number one personality, which was the ego, the child of the vicar, the schoolboy. And then there was this ancient self, number two. And so more or less, he maintained that division, that duality, the rest of his life. And so he would never conceive for himself that he could abandon the ego, i.e. the domain of the psyche. And of course, he said, we only see the world through the psyche. So he would say, we don't see the world actually through the body, and we don't see the world actually through the spirit. Whereas for me, we see the world with all three, personally. But anyway, so he's saying that he's maintaining this kind of duality of personality, this duality of self. And I think he doesn't see any way out of that. I think he's a trapped person. He was a terrified person. So when he was in contact with what he calls the unconscious, he was in a terrified condition. So whenever he let go of his body, he was in sheer panic. So I would say, in reference to the void, if you don't have a dominant ego, if somehow your family, you're not indoctrinated, you're left alone, and so forth, then you might not find it difficult to slip into the void, as it were. Whereas for him, everything was psychological. So for him, the unconscious was untouchable. You couldn't go anywhere near the unconscious. You could never know the unconscious. Whereas in the East, and he said this as well, that whereas we call it unconscious, they call it superconscious. So that means there's a way through the void, which is to become enlightened and go into nirvana, or the clear light of the one mind. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Whereas for Jung, I don't think he came to terms. And I've heard you talk about Abraxas as this phenomenon, this black phenomenon you experienced.
Right, yeah.
And that void, which we all, love to hate, but that void is what he couldn't deal with. I don't think he could see it as a phenomenon. He couldn't allow his psychological, therapeutic, analytical brain to actually see it for what it is. So what happens if you don't see it for what it is? You fantasize. So the whole Jungian method of active imagination, which is a form of, visualization, meditation, so all the therapists and all Jung was concerned with was the visionary level, and not realizing that if you can see through the veil of Maya, if you have a satori, you can see through to nothing, i.e. the black, in a sense, to the thought forms of fantasy is nothing. The black is nothing. And I think the Sufis talk about the black light. So, the black light. So in a sense, void, void nirvana, the clear light of the one mind, they're one and the same. So you might say, rather than being a paradox, it's a mystery. And so I think Jung held on to his ego. He let go and fantasize, and wouldn't conceive of a type of person, maybe like Buddha, that didn't have that problem with attachment to ego, didn't have that problem. And maybe a lot of creative people don't have that problem. Like the surrealists, they can tap in directly to the so-called unconscious.
Yeah, that really is very interesting. So now we got Krishnamurti and Jung, two visionaries struggling with the void, or Abraxas. Yeah, very much like. Yeah, that is true. When I had my vision of Abraxas, he was a big void. But speaking of archetypes, Jung definitely wrote about UFOs, and there's recent findings that he was actually writing to the American government to release some of the information. So it might be more than archetypes. But what do you say about Jung's view of the UFOs? And I believe you yourself had a UFO experience, right, David?
I've had 6. And I've had
6. Wow.
I've had close encounters, and I've had a UFO that penetrated into my brain, etc. And that's a very interesting story, because I was in Oxford, and I was living in the house of Lawrence of Arabia.
Wow.
T. Lawrence. So I can talk about that now, or we can talk about Jung and what he said actually about the UFO. Which would you like to do?
Tell us about Jung and then tie it into your visions or what you experienced.
Right. Okay. You know, his book Flying Saucers came out, I think, 59, and he died in 61. And also his Memory, Dreams, Reflections came out. So in the Memory, Dreams, Reflections, I think it's in the chapter Visions, where he has his near-death experience, which is quite remarkable. And that's where my kind of Jung avatar, because he reveals to the reader that he's actually an incarnation of a particular Buddhist deity, possibly the Maitreya. So he records that he's in a dream and he's on the shores of Lake Zurich where he lives, and a couple of UFOs are kind of buzzing around, and one of them comes right close and extends a lens. Now, he says that it was like a magic lantern, you know, that projects all kinds of pictures. So this lens protrudes, and he says that UFO is projecting C.G. Jung. That's what he says. That UFO is projecting C.G. Jung. So in other words, his identity as C.G. Jung, you know, which everybody knows, C.G. Jung, is projected by that UFO. And he says that whereas we think we're projecting them, they're projecting us. The next paragraph is very interesting because he says he's out walking in a dream. And of course he calls, you know, there's the big dream. So if you have a real vision where you're communicated one-to-one, that would be a big dream vision. Whereas in dreams, it's concealed, you know, it's usually concealed. But anyway, he's in this dream and he's walking along and goes into this chapel, which is a Christian chapel, and there was nothing on the altar. So he's saying there's no kind of Christian relics, but in front of the altar, there's a yogi in lotus posture. And as he looks at his face, he sees it's his own face. So he's looking at this and it's his own face. And he says that when that yogi wakes up, he won't be anymore. So in other words, Jung's in a dream, we're in a dream. And when that yogi, which is his true self on another level, when he wakes up, ego, identity won't exist. Now, the point is, in both of those instances, he won't confront the reality of that, but he fantasizes the idea of letting go or of not being Jung, if you know what I mean.
Indeed, yes. That is very interesting and definitely very insightful. Vance, do you have a question for David?
Yeah, David, I was wondering if the void that you were talking about is related to the initiation experience of the dweller on the threshold that exists in many mystery schools and esoteric traditions.
Yes, when I read Steiner in the late 70s, that was the first time I came upon the notion of the guardian of the threshold. In 1984, when I had that experience of that phenomenon, that power coming over the hill, I also had an awakening of the thousand-petaled lotus. Well, I could explain it, but this other thing that happened was, with psychic phenomenon, you might say, you know, like doing the Zener cards, if you think, then you can't do it. So it's like being receptive to a signal. You know, if somebody comes up and says, "What do I have in my hand?" You have to respond immediately. And if you're psychic, you usually get it right. But if you have to repeat the thing, you know, it goes all wrong. So I'm in the room and I think, I'm going to look out at the sky. I look out. I look to my left. I see a point of light. I look to my right. I see a point of light in a cloudy sky. So, you know, that's the kind of thing. That was a UFO type thing. So one night I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm not sure if I'm actually, my eyes aren't open, but I have an overview of myself on the body. So it could be an out of the body in a sense. And lying right above me, absolutely, my shape was what I call the guardian of the threshold. It was actually very difficult. It was a reptile. It was to me, of all that I've seen in the illustrations, it was like the demon, the devil. But it's beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful, because I love nature, I love animals. So this was absolutely beautiful. It was grey, it was scaly, and it was just, as if it was a replica of me in the bed. And it was absolutely a beautiful thing. And I've had I have hundreds of entities coming into my house at the moment. And they range from like Greek gods and UFOs in the room. And I've seen actually the shades of Hades, hundreds of people lined up in my room. So all these things come along, but none of them have ever frightened me. I've never been afraid of the psychic content, the visionary content, which is absolutely the difference with Jung. He always is in a panic. But I've always found it to be, my main work has been the study of those kind of entities and symbols. So that was my, now I don't know what you would call it from a Gnostic point of view, like UFO, they say about the reptilians being so horrible, well, most of them. But as I say, I don't have that view of nature. I just see nature as doing their own thing. Whatever that reptile was, it was doing its own thing. I don't know, particularly what it was doing, but I know that I was on, you might say, that threshold because I'd read Steiner, and I just immediately thought. And then I had the 1,000-petal lotus, which of course is an extension of the Kundalini, which opens the third eye. So when you open the third eye and the sixth chakra, the ajna, the eye of prajna, intuitive wisdom, the Bodic insight, you can see through the veil, because Kundalini is actually one aspect of Maya, and also Kali is an aspect of Maya, the black and the red, or the scarlet. So the scarlet woman. So if you're in the fifth chakra, sixth chakra, and you have to go through the brain, you have to go through the labyrinth, you have to have a golden thread, the Ariadne thread, because you will never find your way out of it. So you have to go through the chambers of the brain, through the whole brain, the whole matrix. And then Kundalini Shakti unites with Shakta Shiva. And that father-mother dyad allows the yogi to exit through the crown of the head. And that was my experience. There was a hole in the crown of my head when I was asleep. And I went out. It was like a sea of blue and white. It was an infinity of blue and white, almost like waves, like cloud-like waves going forever. And so I relate that reptile, as it were, that lizard. Of course, you know that actually scientifically, zoologically, there is a third eye that's atrophied in lizards. So they definitely symbolize the threshold, and you have to have the third eye. And, so I see the Kundalini, the reptile, and the dragon symbolism as like the Ouroboros in the Gnostic system. From what I've gathered, it encloses, hermetically seals the kind of the cosmos, the psyche, and beyond that's paradise. And in the Kabbalah, it says the head of the dragon is broken in Binah. So when the dragon ascends through the middle pillar, as it were, or entwines the middle pillar, like the Kundalini, and it's poking its head into the supernal paradise, Binah, the mother, the queen, or the sea, breaks the head. And that's precisely at the 11th invisible Sephira, which I call Darth. People mention different terminology.
Like, as in Crowley talked about that. invisible.
Yes, the invisible Sephira is Darth, and that's knowledge. So when the serpent represents the knowledge of good and evil, and it takes, because it's in the midst of the garden, they're kind of linked together. So you have to, so when you go across the threshold into paradise, which you might say Eve, and Sophia, whatever, and wisdom, because it says that the tree of knowledge and death is to be desired to make you wise. So you have to go through the matrix to be wise. You have to do that, the hero. So that's how I would see that the threshold is where death becomes life. No, Eve.
I think that is the tie-in to Gnosticism. I kind of got exactly what you meant. I saw the tie-in between the Eastern and Western ways of experiencing a sort of expanded universe. It sounds to me like you opened yourself through detachment from paradigms and logical systems just to see what's there, and it opened you up to, would you say, and please tell me if I'm off base, it opened you up to extended or expanded qualia, where you could experience more of what's really out in the universe.
Well, I might be quite contrary in the sense of, to say what the Buddhists say, about the physical universe. I have great respect for the physical universe. I have great respect for the European tradition of science. I have great respect for nature as a reality. So I disagree with the Buddhists that say only nirvana is reality. That's what they actually say. And Jung says you can't see the real world around you. I think you see the real world perfectly well. So my view is, when you and I are talking about our experience as human beings, we're talking about, you might say, the cultural world, the cultural world of knowledge, everything everything that can be compressed into a book. So my view is, personally, although there's no way to verify this, I think when we are talking about psycho-spiritual things, cultural, esoteric things, I don't see why, we should agree with the idea of the Tao of physics. I don't see why we should bring the physical universe into it. However, from the phenomenology of, say, the UFO, I think the UFO, if it is interdimensional, then I think we're talking about something beyond the psyche. I think we're talking about, I think Jung was obliquely referencing the UFO and how that intelligence projects the identity of the ego. In other words, is that intelligence enlightenment? Is that the true self? And so when he said he was visited by an alien guest, I would suggest that it was probably that. And that awakened his intellect. His intellect was able to deal with the phenomenology of the self, as his Gnostic book Ion, and his whole work through the labyrinth and the matrix. And I think that in his near-death experience, I think he got a glimpse of the void, but he was still attached to the earth. He was still hovering around the earth, and he saw this black meteorite in the form of a rock temple, which he said was likened to a Buddhist temple he'd seen on his journey in India. And he said that sitting to the left of the entrance into this black monolith was a yogi, i.e. had this yogi thing with his own face. So he sees the yogi in lotus posture. Around the door is a wreath of flames. So there's all these flames around the door, and inside would be what he called the illuminated room. And he said if he had actually gone into the illuminated room, he would meet the people he felt he belonged to in reality. So that, in other words, the people he met on the earth, all these scholars and all these other people, he didn't meet anybody like himself. And his true self, as it were, was more or less saying that if he went in there, he would be with people who could explain what his life was, what it had been about, what history is, what the cosmos is. So he's admitting that he doesn't know. He's admitting that he's bound to knowledge. He doesn't have wisdom.
Was this a physical place, you're saying? Or is it we don't see the entirety of the quote-unquote real world and that you can open yourself up to more of the real world? I'm having a bit of difficulty getting a bead on the reality that you're describing.
In what sense?
I'm imagining Jung, say, seeing these visions, right? Like you just described. Or even, let's take the UFOs. Are they actually really there? Are they physical craft that they're very small and hovering in your room? Or is it that you see beyond with the third eye, you see a vision of more of what's really in the universe? And I'm trying to kind of define an expanded reality. I'm trying to see imagine what you're seeing or the way you imagine the world and the way it's structured. I guess I'm trying to impose a structure on it.
You know, I've had visions and dreams, and I've also, I feel, gone beyond the matrix, gone beyond the psyche in a sense of satori. I wrote about a 3-month episode in 215 in the book One Mind. So I feel, experientially that I've, in many different ways, I've gone beyond the matrix. So if you look at it from a point of enlightenment or satori, the void, I think from the side of the psyche, it would appear black. The threshold and the guardian, the threshold, the Ouroboros, where the head and the tail meet, is where, beyond that is paradise I think in the Gnostic, the book I've read on Gnosis by Kurt Rudolph. When I experienced a UFO, it doesn't matter whether it's actually physical or whether it's from another dimension. I think there's a correlation between the intelligence behind the UFO phenomenon, because I think the UFO phenomenon, as I've seen it in the conspiracy theory thing and all of that, it seems to me when you're dealing with entities, I think in the Tibetan sense, you're dealing with thought forms. So they actually do say that the UFO could be a thought form that can appear and disappear. In Oxford, I lived in the Institute for Psychophysical Research, run by Celia Green, who coined the term lucid dream. And I spent a year there really going deeply into all this kind of out of the body and all of that. It's quite curious at that time, the BBC actually called her up and said, well, what's your opinion of the UFOs landing in Russia? And of course, she knew absolutely nothing about UFOs, but she did say that she thought they were projections and that they were apparitions.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. In our second part, David Curtis expands even further on UFOs and gives us more of his encounters with them, explaining whether they are physical or psychic or spiritual entities, or all of the above, or part of the military-industrial complex. It gets wonderfully weird. He also goes deeper into his notions of the matrix, the notion of archetypes and magical symbols, and how they can help us, and some intriguing ideas on death and the domains beyond, and more. You won't want to miss it, and you can get the second part in our members section. Your support solely keeps this Red Pill Cafeteria open. Oh, some have asked me why I say such things as Dad Cam or Radio. Dad Cam is just my poor attempt at a Midwestern accent, and Radio is some fascination with Elmer Fudd or Peter Cook in The Princess Bride. Nothing magical, I'm afraid, unlike our interview with David Curtis. Jung's been on my mind lately, and even the other day I walked into the living room and one of his books was facing me, one I thought I had lost. Deeper we go as always. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, and I'm glad you're with me. Hello and goodbye as always.